What happens when a woman's greatest hope becomes her deepest secret? When prayers whispered at night transform into desperate bargains. On October 31st, 2023, while Dubai's elite celebrated behind costume masks at the Al-Mansoori mansion, 25-year-old Mae Ann Del Rosario lay dying on the cold concrete floor of a basement room that didn't appear on any household blueprints. By dawn, 2 bodies would be found in that forgotten space beneath one of Dubai's most prestigious homes, a discovery that would briefly disturb the carefully maintained facade of the city's wealthiest families before being quietly erased from public record. The Al-Mansoori compound sits on an exclusive stretch of artificial coastline where Palm Jumeirah meets the Persian Gulf. 6 bedrooms in the main residence, 3 guest houses, a private dock with space for 3 yachts, security systems designed by the same firm that protects royal palaces. Every detail of the property reflects the family's position within Dubai's intricate social hierarchy: old money, royal connections, diplomatic immunity. Sheikh Ibrahim Al-Mansoori served as special envoy to European trade partners, brokering billion-dollar contracts between Emirati investment funds and tech companies from London to Berlin. His wife, Sheikha Jamila, descended from one of the Emirates' founding families, managed their considerable charitable foundation with the precision of a corporate CEO. Their 3 children attended elite universities in America and Britain. Household staff included 27 people from 7 different countries: drivers, gardeners, chefs, cleaners, and personal assistants, all living in separate quarters at the edge of the compound. The family's annual Halloween masquerade had become a highlight of Dubai's fall social season. Originally started as a concession to Western business partners and used to Emirati social customs, the event had evolved into an elaborate affair where cultural boundaries temporarily dissolved behind designer masks and bespoke costumes. The 2023 celebration featured ice sculptures of mythological creatures, a chamber orchestra flown in from Vienna, and a guest list that included government ministers, tech billionaires, and at least 3 minor European royals. Security that night was managed by former military personnel with earpieces and concealed weapons, checking invitations against facial recognition software. From above, satellite images would have shown a property illuminated by thousands of lanterns, with luxury cars lining the private drive and spilling onto the palm frond-shaped street beyond. What those images wouldn't have revealed was the basement level beneath the east wing, accessible only through a staff entrance near the kitchen and a private elevator in the Sheikh study. Originally designed as a secure document storage area, the space had been renovated to include 3 windowless rooms with reinforced doors. Family members later described these rooms as emergency accommodations or medical isolation units. Staff knew better, but those who remained employed by the Al-Mansooris had signed non-disclosure agreements that carried financial penalties exceeding 10 years of their salaries. It was Lourdes Mendoza, the household's senior cook, who found Mae and shortly after 5 a.m. on November 1st. The previous night's celebration had concluded around 3 a.m., and most staff had been dismissed after completing initial cleanup. Lourdes had returned early to begin breakfast preparations when she noticed something unusual. The staff elevator to the basement had been disabled with a maintenance key. Following intuition developed through 23 years in Gulf state households, she used her emergency key to access the service stairs instead. "I knew something was wrong," Lourdes later told a Filipino community advocate in a conversation never shared with authorities. "Mae Ann had missed our Sunday prayer meeting 3 weeks straight. When I asked about her, they said she had gone home for a family emergency. But her mother was sick. She would never leave without sending money first." What Lourdes discovered in the basement's 3rd room defied the carefully maintained order of the Al-Mansoori household. Mae Ann Del Rosario lay on a thin mattress on the floor, her uniform soaked with blood, cradling a tiny, still form wrapped in what appeared to be a white shirt. Medical examiners would later determine that Mae Ann had hemorrhaged following childbirth, losing nearly 40% of her blood volume. The infant, a female of approximately 38 weeks gestation, had lived only minutes. Neither had received medical attention. The household's response revealed practiced deficiency in crisis management. The Sheikh's personal assistant was notified before emergency services. Security cameras covering the basement corridor experienced a technical malfunction, that erased 12 hours of footage. Private medical team arrived before police. Mae Ann's few possessions, the phone, a small suitcase, a Bible, were removed from her assigned staff quarters before any official inventory could be taken. Within hours, a narrative emerged. An undisclosed pregnancy, a medical emergency while the family was occupied with guests, a tragic failure to seek help in time. But what security cameras would later reveal about the hours before her death, footage recovered by an IT specialist sympathetic to Filipino worker advocacy groups, would shock even veteran investigators. These images, showing who visited that basement room in the days leading up to Halloween night, would never appear in official reports. They would, however, raise questions that would follow the Al-Mansoori family across continents, whispered in service corridors from Dubai to London to New York. To understand how Mae Ann Del Rosario ended up alone in that basement, we must first understand her journey, one that began with hope, not desperation. In a small fishing community 7,000 miles from the place she would die, Batangas province stretches along the southwestern coast of Luzon Island in the Philippines, a region of volcanic landscapes and fishing communities where Catholic tradition shapes daily life. In the coastal village of San Luis, the Del Rosario family had fished the same waters for 4 generations. Mae Ann's childhood home was a simple concrete structure with blue-painted shutters, distinguished from neighboring houses by the shrine to Our Lady of Lourdes in the front garden. A testament to her mother's devotion after surviving typhoon waters during Mae Ann's birth in 1998. Educational achievement came naturally to Mae Ann, her high school records showing consistent top marks despite working evening shifts at a local processing plant to supplement family income. Former teachers described a young woman with quiet determination and unusual focus, qualities that earned her a nursing scholarship at a provincial college. She completed 2 years of study before family circumstances forced a difficult decision. In 2019, Teresa Del Rosario, Mae Ann's mother, was diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease requiring dialysis and eventually a transplant, medical expenses far beyond what her father's fishing income could support. Like thousands of Filipino women facing similar situations, Mae Ann made the calculation that would irrevocably alter her life, temporarily abandoning her education to seek employment abroad where salaries for domestic workers exceeded professional wages in the Philippines. She promised she would come back in 3 years. Her younger sister Angelica told a local newspaper, "Just 3 years to save enough for Mama's treatment. Then she would finish her nursing degree." She had it all planned. The crucifix Mae Ann wore, visible in the only photograph the Al-Mansoori family ever released after her death, was a gift from Father Ramon of St. Anthony's Parish before her departure. Her prayer journal, recovered by Lourdes and secretly returned to her family, reveals a young woman who viewed her sacrifice as temporary, necessary, and ultimately blessed by God. 3 years of service for a lifetime of Mama's health, she wrote 2 weeks before leaving. Jesus carried his cross. I can carry mine. Manila's international airport processes thousands of departing overseas Filipino workers daily, a river of human capital that constitutes one of the country's primary exports. Mae Ann joined this exodus in February 2020, arriving in Dubai just weeks before COVID-19 border closures would have prevented her journey. The timing proved financially fortunate. Demand for live-in household staff surged during pandemic restrictions, and her initial 2-year contract with a British expatriate family offered better-than-average conditions. Separate accommodations, regulated hours, and structured time off. When that family relocated to Australia in 2022, Mae Ann's agency secured what appeared to be an ideal placement, a junior household position with the Al-Mansoori family, offering nearly double her previous salary. The compound size meant specialized roles rather than general housekeeping. Mae Ann would be responsible for the family's personal quarters and laundry, with limited interaction with guests or extended family members. This relative invisibility within the household hierarchy would have significant consequences for what followed. Mae Ann's letters home during her first 3 months with the Al-Mansooris described comfortable working conditions, relatively light duties, and the satisfaction of sending substantial portions of her 3,500 dirham monthly salary, approximately $950, to support her mother's treatment. Photos on her phone later recovered by a domestic worker advocacy group show careful documentation of bank transfer receipts, a growing savings account balance, and handwritten tallies projecting when she would reach her financial goal for her mother's transplant. What these communications didn't reveal was the growing attention from one particular member of the household, attention that would transform her carefully planned temporary sacrifice into a tragedy that would never receive official acknowledgement. The United Arab Emirates hosts approximately 750,000 Filipino workers, the majority employed in service sectors, retail, hospitality, healthcare, and domestic work. This labor migration forms a critical economic lifeline to the Philippines, with remittances exceeding $1.5 billion annually from the UAE alone. Within this system, household workers occupy a particularly vulnerable position, their legal status tied directly to employer sponsorship, their daily lives often isolated within private homes beyond the reach of labor inspectors or community support networks. Mae Ann's employment contract with the Al-Mansoori family outlines specific protections: 10-hour workdays, 1 full day off per week, private accommodation in the staff quarters, health insurance, and annual leave. Such terms exceed minimum requirements for domestic workers under UAE labor law, reflecting the family's international profile and connections to diplomatic circles where labor practices face greater scrutiny. The staff compound at the estate's perimeter contained 14 efficiency apartments, each housing 2 workers, arranged around a central courtyard. Mae Ann shared her unit with a Kenyan housekeeper named Esther, their schedules offset so that each had private time in the limited space. Former staff members described the accommodations as basic but adequate, clean, air-conditioned spaces with shared kitchen facilities and reliable internet that enabled regular video calls home. Mae Ann's daily routine began at 5:30 a.m. with morning prayer before reporting to the main house by 6 a.m. Her responsibilities centered on the family's private areas: changing linens, managing laundry, organizing wardrobes, and maintaining the meticulous standards expected in Sheikh Jamila's personal spaces. This role required discretion and precision rather than heavy labor, and provided limited interaction with family members beyond receiving instructions from the household manager or occasionally the Sheikh herself. Mae Ann was perfect for that position, recalled Hassan Tamor, the estate's former head of household staff who left 6 months before her death. She understood the importance of being invisible while present, of maintaining absolute privacy. She noticed details others missed and never complained when schedules changed without warning. The Sheikh commented on her efficiency several times. This efficiency earned Mae an increased responsibility and access to the family's private quarters, including the separate wing where the Sheikh's nephew stayed when visiting from London or New York. By December 2022, she had established a reputation for reliability that allowed her to work with minimal supervision, a privilege that inadvertently created conditions for what followed. Among the extended family members who regularly visited the compound was Tariq Al-Farsi, the Sheikh's sister's son, a 32-year-old finance executive who managed significant portions of the family's European investments. Harvard-educated with an MBA from INSEAD, Tariq represented the cosmopolitan face of Emirati wealth, comfortable in global financial centers, fluent in 4 languages, and adept at bridging cultural divides in business negotiations. Photographs from business publications show a strikingly handsome man with a carefully maintained beard, bespoke suits, and the relaxed confidence of someone who has never faced significant consequences for his actions. Forbes Middle East had profiled him as one of the region's 30 under 30 rising stars in finance, noting his instrumental role in several technology acquisitions and his reputation for identifying undervalued European startups before competitors. What these profiles didn't mention were the family negotiations underway throughout 2022, discussions between the Al-Farsi and Al-Thani families regarding a potential marriage alliance that would connect Tariq to the daughter of a prominent Qatari business dynasty. Such arrangements remain common practice among Gulf state families where marriages represent strategic partnerships rather than primarily romantic connections. The negotiations had progressed to advanced stages, with preliminary agreements on dowry arrangements and business collaborations worth approximately $300 million. Tariq's increased presence at the Al-Mansoori compound during early 2023 coincided with these marriage discussions, as family representatives from both sides met regularly to finalize terms. His assigned quarters in the East Wing placed him directly within Mae Ann's work area, creating daily interactions that would normally remain constrained by strict household protocols separating family from staff. Their first documented interaction beyond standard service exchanges occurred in March 2023. Security footage later reviewed by investigators shows Tariq approaching Mae, and while she organized linens in a storage area, a conversation lasting nearly 4 minutes, far longer than typical task-related communication. While no audio exists, body language analysis suggests an initially uncomfortable exchange that gradually relaxed, ending with Mae and smiling briefly before returning to her work. Former staff members described Tariq's subsequent behavior as increasingly deliberate, appearing in areas where Mae Ann worked, creating small tasks requiring her assistance, initiating conversations about her background and family. These interactions violated unwritten but clearly understood boundaries within Gulf households, where male family members typically communicate with female staff only through intermediaries or in strictly professional contexts. She mentioned him asking about the Philippines, Esther told a community advocate after returning to Kenya. Normal questions at first about food, weather, tourist places. Then more personal, her family, why she came to Dubai, if she had a boyfriend back home. I told her to be careful. Men like that don't just want conversation. Mae Ann's journal entries from this period reveal increasing discomfort with these interactions, coupled with uncertainty about how to address them without jeopardizing her position. Mr. T spoke to me again today about Manila, she wrote in April. He's been to Boracay on holiday and asked if I've ever gone there. When I said no, he said perhaps he could take me someday. I just smiled and continued working. What else could I do? The power imbalance inherent in their positions created a situation where clear boundaries became difficult to maintain. As nephew to her employer, Tariq occupied a position of near-absolute authority within the household structure. Refusing his attention or reporting uncomfortable interactions would risk her employment, the lifeline supporting her mother's medical treatment. Yet engaging beyond professional parameters violated both household rules and her own personal values. This tension between self-protection and financial necessity defines the experience of countless domestic workers in private households worldwide, where isolation and dependency create conditions of particular vulnerability. For Mae Ann, whose entire purpose centered on securing her mother's treatment, the calculation became increasingly complicated as Tariq's attention intensified. By May 2023, security footage shows multiple interactions occurring in areas of the house with limited oversight: the library, rarely used guest rooms, storage areas where Mae Ann performed inventory tasks. What began as uncomfortable attention had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Text messages recovered from Mae Ann's phone, secretly preserved by Lourdes after the official investigation concluded, document Tariq's escalating approach. Initial messages focused on her welfare, offering assistance with sending money home or extending her time off. These gradually shifted to personal compliments, questions about her daily life, and eventually expressions of romantic interest presented as deep respect and admiration. "You're not like the others here," one message read. "You have dignity and intelligence. I see how my aunt trusts you with things she hides from everyone else. You deserve more than this life." Mae Ann's responses show cautious politeness gradually evolving into more personal engagement, a shift that occupational psychologists familiar with workplace power dynamics recognize as common when prolonged attention comes from someone with complete authority over one's livelihood. Her journal entries reveal internal conflict between Catholic values, practical necessity, and perhaps unexpected emotional response to being treated as worthy of attention rather than invisible. "I know this is wrong," she wrote in June. "I pray every night for guidance. But he speaks to me like I matter, like my thoughts are important. No one has done that since I left home. Am I so wrong to listen?" The precise nature of their early relationship remains disputed in unofficial accounts. Staff rumors suggested a calculated seduction. Tariq later claimed genuine emotional connection. Mae Ann's journal suggests a complex reality where coercion and consent became blurred within extreme power inequality. What remains undisputed is that by July 2023, their interactions had crossed professional boundaries into territory that placed Mae Ann in an impossible position. The relationship's pivotal moment came following an alleged incident in late July when Sheikh Jamila nearly discovered them in conversation in the family library. According to accounts Tariq later provided to family members, This near discovery triggered fear that transformed into something unexpected, not termination of their interactions, but intensification behind greater secrecy. It was after this incident that Tariq approached Mae, and with a proposition unprecedented in her experience. A secret marriage performed by a sympathetic imam, with no family present and no official registration. This nikah ceremony, religiously significant but legally unenforceable without proper documentation and family witnesses, would allegedly provide Mae, and with status and protection within Islamic tradition, while maintaining necessary secrecy until the right time for public acknowledgement. He didn't just suggest it, reported a staff member who spoke with Mae and afterward. He presented it as a solution to protect her. He said without marriage, any relationship between them would be haram, forbidden by God. But with nikah, they would be blessed. He even quoted religious texts about the Prophet's respect for wives. For a devoutly Catholic woman in a vulnerable position, the promise of legitimacy offered something unexpected, a way to reconcile physical attraction with spiritual values. The nikah would not be recognized by her church, but it represented commitment rather than exploitation, a private acknowledgement of human dignity within a system where she otherwise existed only as functional labor. The ceremony reportedly took place in early August at a small mosque in Al-Quaz district, far from the compound, with only the imam and one witness present. Tariq presented Mae and with a simple gold band inscribed with Arabic script, a ring she would later clutch even in death. Photographs found in her Bible show Mae, and wearing a white headscarf, standing beside Tariq outside a nondescript building, her expression conveying a complex mixture of hope and uncertainty that would later haunt investigators who understood what followed. What Mae and couldn't have fully understood was that this ceremony, without family consent, proper registration, or adherence to UAE marriage regulations, held no legal standing. While religiously meaningful to participants, such arrangements provide no rights or protections under family law. Moreover, the power differential between participants would likely invalidate consent under any meaningful ethical standard. Yet for several weeks following the ceremony, text messages suggest Mae and believed in the relationship's legitimacy. Her communications with Tariq refer to our future, and when we can tell everyone, indicating genuine expectation of eventual public acknowledgement. Her journal entries from August show someone experiencing both emotional connection and continued anxiety, a woman divided between hope for unexpected blessing and fear of consequences she couldn't fully anticipate. This period of secret marriage and fragile hope ended abruptly in late August when Mae Ann discovered her pregnancy, news she shared with Tariq via encrypted messages that would later be recovered only partially. His initial response appeared supportive, promising arrangements for her care and eventual acknowledgement of both relationship and child. For approximately 2 weeks, Mae Ann's journals suggest a woman cautiously embracing unexpected joy despite circumstances far from her original life plan. Then everything changed. The discovery that would trigger the sequence of events leading to that basement room on Halloween night occurred not through carelessness, but through deliberate surveillance motivated by entirely different concerns. The first physical signs of Mae Ann's pregnancy appeared subtly: morning sickness disguised as food sensitivity, fatigue attributed to longer work hours during Ramadan preparations. Her journals from early September document careful calculations, counting backward to confirm what she already suspected, followed by private moments of prayer seeking guidance for an unexpected life change. The single pregnancy test, purchased during her Sunday off and taken in a mall restroom to ensure privacy, now exists only as a referenced memory in text messages to Tariq. It shows positive. 2 lines. Very clear. For exactly 9 days, security footage shows Mae Ann moving through the compound with a new lightness, almost imperceptible to those who didn't know her well, but evident in slightly lingering smiles and momentary pauses near the nursery where the Sheikh's youngest grandchildren stayed during visits. Her phone records showed daily communications with Tariq, who was traveling in London on family business. Their exchanges filled with cautious planning and shared anxiety about eventual disclosure to the family. "We'll tell them after the Qatari negotiations conclude," Tariq wrote on September 12. "My father will be angry at first, but a grandchild changes everything. Give me until after Eid. I promise I'll handle everything." Mae Ann's responses reveal someone balancing between hope and pragmatism. "I trust you, she wrote, "but I'm thinking about practical things too. My contract ends in February. What happens then? Where will I go when I start showing? I can't work like this forever." The pregnancy introduced immediate practical concerns beyond their relationship's future. UAE healthcare requires marriage certificates for maternity services. Unmarried pregnancy can result in imprisonment and deportation. Employment contracts typically terminate immediately upon pregnancy discovery. Without legal documentation of their nikah ceremony, Mae Ann faced an impossible situation where seeking prenatal care meant risking everything. Yet avoiding medical attention endangered both her health and the child's. Her journal entries show attempts to create contingency plans, researching Filipino communities in neighboring Oman where restrictions might prove less severe, calculating savings against costs of returning home to give birth, considering whether quiet disclosure to Sheikh Jamila might yield unexpected mercy. These plans remained theoretical exercises. However, as Tariq's messages continued to counsel patience and discretion, while he prepared the way with his family, what neither of them knew was that their secret had already begun unraveling through an entirely unexpected channel. In late August, the Al-Farsi family's cybersecurity team had detected unusual activity in Tariq's financial accounts, not Mae Ann related, but concerning transfers to a London technology startup outside official family investment channels. This discovery prompted Layla Al-Farsi, Tariq's mother and the Sheikh's sister, to authorize deeper surveillance of her son's digital footprint. The team, comprised of former intelligence officers now working privately for Gulf state families, gained access to Tariq's cloud storage, personal email, and encrypted messaging applications. Their initial focus on financial impropriety shifted dramatically when they discovered photographs of the nikah ceremony, saved journal entries describing his feelings for Mae Ann, and the complete text message history between them. The mother's reaction was volcanic, reported a former security team member who requested anonymity. Not because her son had developed feelings for someone inappropriate, such things happen, but because he had involved religion in what should have remained a private indiscretion. The nikah made it family business. On September 21st, while Tariq attended meetings with investment partners in Mayfair, his father Abdullah Al-Farsi received a secure file containing every digital communication between his son and Mae Ann. The family response was immediate and comprehensive. Private jets were dispatched to return Tariq to Dubai within 24 hours. Security protocols at the Al-Mansoori compound were enhanced with specific instructions regarding Mae Ann's movements. The family's legal team began drafting documents addressing potential scenarios ranging from quiet financial settlements to more permanent solutions. The confrontation between Tariq and his parents occurred in Sheikh Ibrahim's private study, a wood-paneled room with security features that prevented any recording or surveillance. 3 hours of discussion concluded with non-negotiable terms presented as both family mandate and business necessity. Tariq's passport was confiscated. His access to family accounts was suspended. His personal devices were replaced with new ones lacking previous communications. Most significantly, he was informed of immediate travel arrangements to London, where he would remain at the family's Belgravia property until the situation resolves itself. The terms regarding Mae Ann were equally absolute. A medical examination would confirm the pregnancy. Her position would be terminated with appropriate compensation. Arrangements would be made for immediate return to the Philippines. Alternative solutions could be discussed only after her departure from UAE soil, a thinly veiled suggestion of pregnancy termination that conflicted with both her Catholic faith and personal desires. Tariq's resistance crumbled when confronted with financial reality. The family presentation included detailed projections of his inheritance compared against his prospects if disinherited billions versus the modest personal savings he had accumulated through salary. More devastating was the calculated impact on his professional reputation if the family withdrew support from ventures associated with his name. The pending Qatari marriage arrangement represented not just family alliance but financial partnerships worth hundreds of millions, connections that would instantly dissolve if he chose Mae Ann instead. His mother told him, "You can have your maid or your future, but not both," recalled a household staff member who overheard portions of the conversation. She said this wasn't a romance novel where love conquers all. This was real life where choices have consequences. Surveillance footage from that evening shows Tariq entering the East Wing residential area at 11:43 p.m., his movements suggesting emotional distress, pausing in hallways, hands pressed against walls for support, once striking a decorative table hard enough to dislodge an antique vase. His private security detail maintained distance but remained visible, their presence confirming the family's determination to manage his actions until departure. Mae Ann received only digital notification of his decision. At 2:17 a.m., a final message arrived on her phone. "I'm leaving tomorrow. They know everything. I tried to fight, but there's no way forward for us. They'll arrange your return to Philippines with good compensation. I'm sorry. Stay quiet about everything. For your own good and the baby's, just accept what they offer. Please forget me." The message concluded with words in Arabic that language experts would later translate as, "Forgive me for being weaker than my promises." Mae Ann's journals contain no entries for the next 3 days. Security footage shows her performing duties with mechanical precision, face expressionless, movements efficient but devoid of her previous energy. Staff members recalled her silence during meal breaks, her absence from evening prayer gatherings that had previously been non-negotiable parts of her routine. When Esther asked about her condition, Mae Ann reportedly replied only, "God has a plan, even when we don't understand it." On September 25th, Mae Ann was summoned to Sheikh Jamila's private sitting room, an unprecedented meeting that violated normal household hierarchy. No recordings exist of this conversation, but staff accounts suggest it lasted approximately 40 minutes and concluded with Mae Ann being escorted to the compound's medical office for examination. The family's private physician, Dr. Rania Khalid, later provided limited testimony to workplace safety investigators, confirming pregnancy of approximately 7 weeks while offering no information about discussions with the patient. Medical records indicate basic prenatal blood work but no standard counseling or follow-up appointments, omissions that would later raise questions about ethical violations within the healthcare system's treatment of domestic workers. What followed this confirmation defied even UAE's relaxed enforcement of domestic worker protections. Rather than formal termination with repatriation, the standard procedure for pregnant household staff, Mae Ann was relocated to a different position within the compound. Her duties shifted from the family's private areas to inventory management in storage facilities, effectively removing her from household visibility while maintaining technical employment. Her accommodation changed as well. Staff records show official transfer to private medical isolation due to health concerns requiring monitoring, bureaucratic language masking her transfer to the basement rooms beneath the East Wing. This relocation occurred without notification to the Philippines embassy or documentation through proper labor channels, creating a situation where Mae Ann effectively disappeared from official oversight while remaining physically present on the property. The gold band from the nikah ceremony disappeared during this transition, confiscated along with her phone and passport items described in household records as secured for safekeeping during medical treatment. Her only remaining possessions included religious items considered too personal to remove: her Bible, rosary beads, and a small wooden cross sent by her mother from Batangas. Lord Mendoza, who managed to maintain minimal contact through kitchen duties, later described Mae Ann's basement accommodation. It wasn't a prison exactly. The door wasn't locked. But where could she go? No papers, no money, no phone. And the guards at the compound gate had been told she wasn't permitted to leave for medical safety. They made a cage without needing bars. For the next 5 weeks, Mae Ann existed in a twilight state between employment and detention. Daily meals were delivered by rotating staff members instructed to minimize conversation. Medical checks occurred weekly but focused solely on preventing complications that might require hospital visits rather than ensuring maternal well-being. Her pregnancy progressed with only prayer books and Bible verses as companions, her isolation nearly complete except for brief interactions with household staff who risked their own positions to offer small comforts, extra blankets, pregnancy vitamins smuggled from outside pharmacies, handwritten notes of encouragement. Throughout October, the Al-Farsi and Al-Mansoori families proceeded with their external obligations as if no disruption had occurred. Tariq resumed his London position with appropriate explanations about extended business requirements. The Qatari marriage negotiations continued with adjusted timelines. The family's philanthropic foundation announced new initiatives supporting women's education, public commitments to female empowerment that stood in stark contrast to the basement reality hidden beneath expensive marble floors. As preparations for the annual Halloween masquerade intensified in late October, Mae Ann marked her 214th day in Dubai since her last visit home, each day recorded in her journal with a prayer for her mother's health and, increasingly, for the child growing within her. The final entry, dated October 30th, contains words that would later be read at a small memorial service in Batangas. Whatever happens tomorrow, I choose to believe that love creates life for a purpose. My baby will be born into light, not darkness. I will make sure of it. October 31st, 2023 arrived with unusual weather for Dubai. Unexpected rain showers that required last-minute adjustments to the outdoor portions of the Al-Mansoori masquerade. Staff had been preparing for weeks, transforming the compound's central courtyard and main reception spaces into elaborate scenes from world mythology. This year's theme, Divine Masks, featured installations representing deities from various cultures: Greek Olympians, Hindu gods, Egyptian pantheons, and Norse legends rendered in ice sculptures, floral arrangements, and projected lighting effects. By early afternoon, white-gloved workers were arranging final displays of imported orchids flown in from Singapore that morning. Security personnel conducted perimeter sweeps while verifying guest credentials against biometric data. 3 renowned chefs from Michelin-starred restaurants supervised kitchen preparations for 700 expected attendees, including government ministers, foreign diplomats, and business leaders whose combined wealth represented approximately 8% of the Emirates' GDP. Preparation records show meticulous attention to atmospheric details. Temperature controlled to precisely 22 degrees Celsius, custom fragrance diffused through ventilation systems, lighting programmed to shift subtly throughout the evening to complement couture fashions photographed for society publications. The Sheikh's private collection of rare masks, ceremonial pieces from African, Asian, and indigenous American cultures, had been removed from climate-controlled storage for one-night display, each item insured for sums exceeding Mae Ann's lifetime earnings. The staff uniform for the event consisted of black formal attire with golden masks covering only the eyes, a theatrical touch that complemented the theme while maintaining the necessary invisibility of service workers. 53 staff members were documented in pre-event briefings. Mae Ann Del Rosario was not among them. Security footage from the basement level shows no movement in the corridor outside her room between 2 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. The only scheduled visit, a staff member delivering an evening meal, appears in logs but not on camera, suggesting either technical malfunction or deliberate interruption of recording during this period. When footage resumes, the meal tray remains untouched outside her door. At 7:42 p.m., as guests began arriving upstairs, the first evidence of Mae Ann's labor appears in the limited footage available, her door opening. Briefly, her figure visible for moments as she seems to brace herself against the door frame before retreating inside. Medical examiners would later estimate that early contractions likely began hours earlier, with active labor underway by this point. The contrast between simultaneous events on different levels of the house defies literary invention. Upstairs, Dubai's elite arrived in custom couture and jewelry requiring personal security details. The Sheikh and his wife greeted Saudi princes, British banking executives, and American tech investors beneath crystal chandeliers imported from Venice. A chamber orchestra performed classical arrangements of film soundtracks, while servers circulated with champagne aged specifically for this occasion. Downstairs, a 25-year-old woman experienced childbirth without medical assistance, pain management, or human support of any kind. The basement room contained basic furnishings: a bed, small table, private bathroom, and limited medical supplies appropriate for minor illness rather than childbirth. The concrete floor where she was ultimately found had been partially covered with towels from the bathroom, evidence of her attempt to create a cleaner space for delivery as labor progressed. The temperature in that room never exceeded 18 degrees Celsius, noted a maintenance worker who later spoke to labor advocates. The climate system treated it as storage space, not living quarters. It would have been uncomfortably cold, especially for someone in medical distress. Between 8:30 p.m. and midnight, Security footage captures 3 instances of Mae Ann's door opening, brief moments where she emerges to seek help before returning inside, presumably during contractions. Each time, the corridor remains empty, staff attention focused entirely on the elaborate celebration above. The sound insulation between floors, designed to prevent service noise from disrupting family activities, now worked in reverse, ensuring that no sounds from the basement could penetrate the music and conversation of the masquerade. Forensic analysis of Mae Ann's journal, found clutched in her hand along with her rosary beads, reveals final entries written during early labor. The handwriting deteriorates from her typically neat script to increasingly irregular characters as contractions intensified. The final coherent entry, timestamped 10:17 p.m., reads, "Madre de Dios, please let someone check on me tonight. I'm scared. Something feels wrong." By 11 p.m., the gala reached its peak with the traditional midnight mask removal ceremony approaching, a choreographed moment where guests simultaneously lower their masks at the Sheikh's signal, symbolically revealing true identities while maintaining the pretense that relationships formed behind disguises somehow transcend ordinary social boundaries. Photographs from society publications show elaborate costumes worth tens of thousands of dollars, jewels catching carefully positioned lighting, champagne fountains flanked by ice sculptures slowly melting in calculated aesthetic deterioration. Medical examiners estimate Mae Ann gave birth shortly before midnight, alone on the concrete floor of the basement room. The female infant, later determined to be approximately 38 weeks gestation rather than the expected 34 weeks, showed signs of respiratory distress at birth. Without medical intervention, the child survived only minutes. Forensic evidence indicates that Mae Ann attempted rescue breathing based on techniques likely learned during nursing studies, efforts that proved insufficient without proper medical equipment. The physical toll of unassisted childbirth, combined with what physicians later identified as placental complications, resulted in postpartum hemorrhage that rapidly became life-threatening. Blood evidence throughout the room documents Mae Ann's attempts to reach the emergency call button near the bathroom door, a distance of only 4 meters that became insurmountable as blood loss accelerated. Her final act, reconstructed from the scene, was returning to her child's side, wrapping the infant in her own uniform shirt, and positioning her Bible beneath the baby's head like a pillow. Upstairs, as midnight approached, the masquerade reached its theatrical climax. The Sheikh delivered his annual address celebrating cultural exchange and mutual understanding, praising Dubai's unique position bridging East and West. Security footage shows guests applauding his words about honoring traditions while embracing progress, phrases that would later appear with bitter irony in advocacy publications discussing Mae Ann's case. The traditional midnight toast, performed with specially commissioned crystal flutes, coincided almost precisely with the moment medical examiners estimate Mae Ann lost consciousness from blood loss. The chamber orchestra's performance of a classical arrangement of Time to Say Goodbye provided soundtrack to her final minutes, the music faintly audible through ventilation systems connecting the building's levels. Post-event cleanup continued until approximately 3 a.m., with staff focused entirely on the main reception areas. The basement level remained unchecked, standard protocol requiring no service to these areas during events. It was only at 5:12 a.m., when Lourdes Mendoza used her emergency access key to check on Mae Ann, that the situation was discovered. Security footage shows Lourdes entering the corridor, knocking on Mae Ann's door, then entering after receiving no response. 27 seconds later, she emerges in visible distress, using her staff communication device to call for help. The first responders were not emergency medical personnel but the family's private security team, arriving 3 minutes later and immediately implementing information control protocols designed for high-profile incidents. The scene they encountered defied sanitization despite their efforts. Mae Ann lay on the concrete floor, her uniform soaked with blood, cradling her infant daughter wrapped in a white shirt. Her Bible lay open beside them, the pages stained but text still legible, Psalm 23 marked with a prayer card showing the Virgin Mary. Clutched in her hand was the single physical evidence of her relationship with Tariq that had escaped confiscation, a folded copy of their nikah certificate hidden within her Bible's cover, now partially obscured by bloodstains but with both signatures still visible. Most revealing was the final proof of her humanity in extremis, written in her own blood on the concrete beside her. Her name is Angelica, the same as her younger sister waiting in Batangas for her promised return. The next 30 minutes revealed the family's crisis management system operating with mechanical efficiency. Rather than emergency medical services, the Sheikh's personal physician arrived with a private medical team. Digital communications show security lockdown protocols implemented throughout the compound, with staff confined to quarters and external communications suspended under pretense of a possible security breach. By 6:30 a.m., as dawn broke over Dubai's skyline, the Al-Mansoori compound had transformed from celebration venue to sealed environment. The bodies of Mae Ann and her daughter had been moved to the family's private medical facility for examination. Her room was being processed by specialists trained in evidence removal rather than collection. The narrative that would eventually reach official channels was already being crafted in the Sheikh's private study, where family representatives, legal advisors, and security personnel gathered to manage what they classified as reputation risk, rather than human tragedy. What they couldn't manage, however, was Lourdes Mendoza, a woman whose 23 years of loyal service contained one loyalty greater than employment. Before security protocols fully activated, she had used her personal phone to send 3 photographs to her sister in Manila. Mae Ann's body on the floor, the infant wrapped in white, and the blood-written name that would otherwise have disappeared from history entirely. "I didn't do it to create scandal," Lourdes later told advocates. "I did it because without proof, Mae Ann would just disappear." Another statistic. Another worker who returned home without anyone asking questions. "I couldn't save her, but I could make sure someone remembered she existed." This digital evidence, transmitted before communication blackout, would ultimately prevent the complete erasure of events that Halloween night, creating accountability that wealth and influence had nearly managed to avoid entirely. The morning after Halloween unfolded with 2 parallel processes, one official, one hidden. By 7:15 a.m., private medical personnel had removed Mae Ann's body and her infant daughter from the basement room, transporting them via service elevator to the family's medical facility on the compound's western edge. This building, ostensibly maintained for family health care, contained equipment matching hospital standards and staff with confidentiality agreements exceeding typical medical ethics requirements. Simultaneously, the household entered crisis management protocols refined through previous incidents involving staff or guests. Digital records show systematic communication blackout. Staff phones collected for security updates, internet access temporarily suspended due to technical maintenance, and compound exits restricted pending safety inspections. These measures, described in internal documents as information containment procedures, effectively isolated 47 staff members from external contact during critical initial hours. Dr. Faisal Ahmadi, the Al-Mansoori family's private physician for 15 years, supervised examination of Mae Ann and her infant. His credentials included medical training at Johns Hopkins followed by a prestigious surgical residency, professional qualifications that contrasted with his willingness to operate outside standard medical protocols when family interests required discretion. The preliminary findings from his examination were documented in a private report shared only with Sheikh Ibrahim and family legal representatives. Deceased female, approximately 25 years, showing evidence of recent childbirth with complications including placental abruption and subsequent hemorrhage. Estimated blood loss exceeding 1,500 milliliters. No evidence of medical intervention or assistance during delivery. Female infant, approximately 38 weeks gestation, with indications of respiratory distress syndrome and brief postpartum survival. Estimated 3 to 7 minutes. Both deaths preventable with basic medical care. This clinical assessment, never included in official records, represented the only honest documentation of what occurred. By 9:30 a.m., as staff remained confined to quarters, the family's legal team had developed the narrative that would eventually reach authorities, a version engineered to minimize liability while technically satisfying reporting requirements for workplace fatalities. The revised account transformed Mae Ann from secret wife to irresponsible employee, pregnancy from known condition to concealed personal choice, and family actions from deliberate isolation to unfortunate oversight. This narrative hinged on 3 fabricated elements that would later appear in official statements. that Mae Ann had hidden her pregnancy from employers, that she had refused medical attention when offered, and that her basement accommodation represented compassionate alternative to termination rather than deliberate concealment. Sheikh Ibrahim personally contacted government officials before any formal report was filed, leveraging relationships cultivated through decades of business partnerships and political donations. These conversations, conducted through secure channels without documentation, established parameters for subsequent official response, minimal investigation, expedited processing, and media management coordinated with family representatives. The official notification to authorities occurred at 11:17 a.m. through the family's legal representative rather than direct emergency services contact. This procedural irregularity, which would have triggered automatic investigation in most jurisdictions, passed without comment due to the family's standing. The case was assigned to Inspector Khalil Nasser, whose previous interactions with prominent families demonstrated appropriate sensitivity to reputational concerns alongside technical adherence to legal requirements. His arrival at the compound at 1:45 p.m., nearly 9 hours after discovery, found an environment already sanitized of critical evidence. The basement room had been cleaned, with blood evidence removed and personal effects collected. Mae Ann's body had been prepared for examination in ways that obscured timeline indicators forensic investigation would typically rely upon. Most significantly, digital evidence including security footage from critical periods had been corrupted through what technical reports would describe as system malfunction during scheduled backup. Inspector Nasser's preliminary investigation consisted primarily of prepared statements from household management, limited physical examination of already processed scenes, and brief interviews with selected staff members conducted under supervision of family representatives. His official notes reference cooperative witnesses and consistent accounts, bureaucratic language masking the controlled nature of information available to him. The witness statements presented to authorities described a narrative where Mae Ann had concealed her condition until medical crisis made intervention impossible. Household manager Adil Rahman's signed statement claimed, "We had no knowledge of any pregnancy. She requested privacy due to personal illness, which we respected. Had we known her condition, appropriate medical care would have been arranged immediately." This account contradicted physical evidence including Mae Ann's medical examination records from September and daily meal deliveries to her isolated room. But these contradictions never entered official documentation. Staff members who might have provided alternate perspectives remained separated from investigators, their eventual statements taken only after thorough briefing about protecting household privacy and avoiding unnecessary complications. The exception to this managed narrative came from an unexpected source. Lord Mendoza, whose 3 decades of household service had earned rare privileges, secured brief, unsupervised contact with a junior officer assisting Inspector Nasser. During this 2-minute exchange, she transferred a handwritten note containing contact information for Mae Ann's family in Batangas and a Filipino labor advocate in Dubai. This small act of resistance would eventually connect parallel investigations that the official process sought to prevent. By evening, Inspector Nasser had completed preliminary documentation sufficient to classify the death as medical misadventure during unattended childbirth, language that implied personal choice, rather than imposed isolation. His report recommended standard procedures for foreign worker fatalities: notification of national embassy, processing of remaining salary and benefits, and repatriation of remains following minimal autopsy. What this official processing failed to capture were details visible to those working within the household. The hasty removal of Mae Ann's limited possessions from staff quarters. The Sheikh's wife personally supervising collection of all photographs containing Mae Ann from staff mobile phones during the security inspection. The unusually generous overtime payments offered to staff who had direct knowledge of basement accommodations or meal deliveries. Most telling was the family's treatment of Mae Ann's Bible and rosary beads, items found with her body that held potential evidence, including the blood-stained nikah certificate hidden within its cover. Rather than processing these as personal effects for return to family, they were reportedly destroyed as biohazardous materials, an unprecedented deviation from protocols that typically treated religious items with particular respect regardless of condition. The official death notification reached the Philippines Embassy on November 2nd. A standardized form listing cause as obstetric hemorrhage with no reference to circumstances or prior conditions. The attached compensation calculation followed minimum requirements: remaining salary, standard death benefit of 1 month's wages, and basic repatriation costs for remains. The total amount, 7,500 dirhams, approximately $2,000, represented less than the cost of a single floral arrangement from the Halloween masquerade. What official channels couldn't control, however, was parallel information flow through expatriate community networks. Lord Mendoza's photographs, initially sent to her sister in Manila, reached Filipino worker advocacy groups within 24 hours of Mae Ann's death. These organizations, experienced with case patterns where official investigations minimized employer responsibility, immediately mobilized response teams that operated beneath official radar. Maricel Santos, legal advisor for Domestic Workers United, reviewed initial evidence and recognized familiar patterns. The immediate family involvement, private medical team, delayed official notification. These are hallmarks of cases where wealthy employers manage consequences rather than investigate causes. Our first priority was preserving evidence before it disappeared entirely. This preservation effort focused on 3 channels: staff testimonies recorded before returning to home countries, digital evidence including text messages shared between workers, and Mae Ann's communications with family and friends in the Philippines during earlier stages of her employment. These fragmented information sources, while insufficient for legal proceedings within UAE jurisdiction, created documentation that official investigations deliberately avoided. Most significantly, advocacy groups made direct contact with Mae Ann's family in Batangas before official notification arrived. This critical timing difference allowed her mother Teresa to refuse initial settlement offers and request comprehensive investigation, legal rights that grieving families often surrender when pressured during official notification processes. The family's response team anticipated such resistance. Within 48 hours of Mae Ann's death, their representatives had contacted the Del Rosario family directly, presenting what they described as a compassionate settlement in exchange for confidentiality agreements and liability waivers. The offered amount, 150,000 dirhams, approximately $40,000, represented substantial money to a fishing family but a negligible expense to protect family reputation worth billions. Teresa Del Rosario, still receiving dialysis treatments funded by her daughter's remittances, faced impossible calculations balancing immediate medical needs against accountability for Mae Ann's death. Her response, recorded in a conversation with advocates, demonstrated the moral clarity that wealth often fails to anticipate. "My daughter sent money to save my life. I won't sell her justice to save myself." This refusal triggered escalation within the Al-Mansoori response strategy. Their representatives in Manila increased settlement offers while simultaneously pursuing alternative pressure through local officials, business connections, and eventually subtle surveillance of family activities. When financial inducement failed, implied consequences for family members' employment, loan applications, and community standing followed soft power tactics refined through previous reputation management situations. The Philippines embassy in UAE, caught between diplomatic priorities and citizen advocacy, initially processed Mae Ann's case according to standard procedures for overseas worker fatalities. Ambassador Maria Castillo requested basic investigation but stopped short of demands that might strain bilateral relations between nations with significant economic ties. This institutional caution changed only when media organizations in Manila began publishing details from advocacy groups' parallel investigation. Public attention forced procedural adjustments. The autopsy, initially scheduled as cursory examination, expanded to include international observers. Document requests that had faced administrative delays suddenly received expedited processing. Most significantly, formal interviews with household staff were conducted by embassy personnel without family representatives present, creating the first official record contradicting managed narratives. These interviews revealed critical details. Mae Ann's pregnancy had been known to household management since September. Her basement accommodation represented deliberate concealment rather than medical consideration. Staff had been instructed to minimize contact and report any external communications. Most damaging to the official narrative, multiple witnesses confirmed that family members regularly visited the basement level during her isolation, directly contradicting claims of unaware neglect rather than deliberate action. Despite this expanded investigation, jurisdictional realities limited potential outcomes. UAE labor laws, while technically comprehensive, contain enforcement exceptions for families with diplomatic connections. Criminal investigations require evidence standards difficult to meet when scene processing, witness access, and documentation remain controlled by interested parties. International pressure faces practical limitations when balanced against regional alliance considerations and investment relationships. The investigation's final report, submitted on November 25, reflected these constraints while still documenting truth unavailable in initial accounts. The formal classification changed from medical misadventure to preventable death through negligent oversight, language that acknowledged systematic failure without assigning deliberate intent. Compensation recommendations increased to 300,000 dirhams, approximately $82,000, but criminal charges against family members remained conspicuously absent despite evidence supporting potential indictments under existing UAE labor statutes. Most revealing was what the report omitted entirely: any mention of Tariq Al-Farsi, the nikah ceremony, or the relationship that preceded pregnancy. These elements, documented through advocacy investigation and witness testimonies, disappeared from official records as effectively as the blood evidence from the basement floor. The investigation acknowledged death while erasing the life that preceded it, reducing Mae Ann from woman to worker, from aspiring nurse to statistical formality. For the Al-Mansoori and Al-Farsi families, this outcome represented successful crisis management rather than justice failure. Financial penalties remained insignificant against family resources. Reputational damage stayed contained within expatriate communities without reaching business partners or diplomatic circles. Most importantly, Tariq's pending marriage negotiations continued without disruption, his connection to Mae Ann officially non-existent in any documentation that might affect future arrangements. What they failed to anticipate was the persistence of truth through channels beyond their control, channels that would eventually connect Mae Ann's story to broader patterns of justice denied across national boundaries and economic divisions. 3 weeks after Mae Ann's death, Tariq Al-Farsi attended a private dinner at Claridge's Hotel in London, celebrating the official announcement of his engagement to Fatima Al Thani, daughter of Qatar's third-largest development conglomerate. Photographs published in business publications show him in bespoke evening wear, smiling beside his fiancée while prominent financial figures offer congratulations. His father Abdullah presents a toast celebrating the union of two great families building shared future prosperity, language that reduces marriage to business merger with appropriate dynastic terminology. What these photographs don't capture is the plain manila envelope delivered to Tariq's Belgravia residence that same morning, containing only 2 items: the gold wedding band from their nikah ceremony, somehow salvaged from family confiscation, and a handwritten note in Tagalog that required translation services to understand. Ong pagibig mo'y paring Halloween, mascara lang. Your love was like Halloween, just a mask. The envelope's sender remains officially unidentified, though household staff turnover following Mae Ann's death included 17 employees who secured positions with other prominent families throughout the Gulf region and beyond. The timing, coordinated precisely with engagement announcements published in financial newspapers, suggested inside knowledge of Tariq's schedule and public relations strategy. A second envelope, delivered 1 week later to the same address, remained unopened despite multiple delivery attempts. Eventually returned to its sender in Manila, this package contained a single lock of black hair tied with white thread, the traditional Filipino custom for preserving a child's first haircut, in this case performed by Lourdes Mendoza hours before Mae Ann and her daughter were removed from family control. I took it while preparing her body, Lourdes explained during advocacy interviews conducted after her return to the Philippines. The baby had perfect hair, thick and black like her mother's. In our tradition, the first cutting brings good fortune. I thought if I couldn't give this child life, I could at least give her proper rituals. This intimate act of cultural preservation contrasted sharply with official handling of remains. Following minimal examination confirming cause of death, Mae Ann's body was processed according to standard protocols for foreign worker fatalities: basic preparation, document processing, and transport coordination managed by the Philippines Embassy. Her infant daughter, however, fell outside these established procedures, creating bureaucratic questions about appropriate classification, religious considerations, and repatriation requirements. The Al-Mansoori family's solution reflected their broader approach to inconvenient realities. Financial arrangements with a local Christian cemetery provided unmarked burial for the infant, documented as unidentified newborn, without familial connection or religious ceremony. This administrative erasure, technically legal but ethically problematic, represented final severance of connection between Tariq's family and the consequences of his actions. What family influence couldn't control was the community response coordinated through expatriate networks. While official burial occurred without ceremony, Filipino workers throughout Dubai organized parallel memorial observances, combining Catholic tradition with homeland customs. A prayer vigil held at St. Mary's Catholic Church gathered over 300 participants, most employed by prominent families who granted special permission to attend what was described as religious obligation, rather than political statement. More significant was the collection organized among domestic workers to fund proper burial arrangements in Batangas. These contributions, often amounting to substantial percentages of monthly salaries, eventually exceeded $7,000, sufficient for transportation of both bodies and appropriate funeral services in Mae Ann's hometown. The financial solidarity among workers earning minimum wages created stark contrast with the Al-Mansoori family's calculated minimum legal compliance despite billions in resources. When Mae Ann and her daughter finally returned to Batangas on December 12, over 600 community members attended funeral services at St. Anthony's Parish, where she had received her departure blessing nearly 4 years earlier. The child, officially named Angelica Mae in baptismal ceremonies performed before burial, received traditional Filipino funeral rites including white clothing, flower garlands, and community prayers led by Father Ramon, who had blessed Mae Ann's journey to Dubai. God does not measure lives by their length but by their love, his sermon observed. This child lived only minutes in this world, but her existence revealed truth that wealth tried to hide. Her mother's sacrifice reminds us that the powerful may control many things, but they cannot control the human spirit or God's judgment. This spiritual assessment found no equivalent in legal accountability. Despite expanded investigation and documentary evidence contradicting official narratives, no criminal charges were filed against family members or household management. The final settlement, 350,000 dirhams, approximately $95,000, plus outstanding salary and benefits, represented significant financial support for the Del Rosario family but negligible impact on Al-Mansoori resources. Teresa Del Rosario used these funds to complete kidney treatment that her daughter's employment had been intended to finance. The medical outcomes her daughter had sacrificed to secure were ultimately achieved, though at incalculable cost. Additional funds established educational scholarships for young women in Batangas province, creating legacy that extended beyond immediate family boundaries. "My daughter left to save my life," Teresa explained during a community foundation announcement. "Now her memory will help other young women build lives without leaving home. This is how we honor what cannot be changed." For the Al-Farsi and Al-Mansoori families, financial resolution represented conclusion rather than accountability. Their subsequent activities showed minimal disruption to established patterns. Sheikh Ibrahim continued diplomatic engagements with European trade partners. Tariq's wedding to Fatima Al-Thani proceeded in March 2024 with appropriate society coverage and business announcements. The annual Halloween masquerade continued as scheduled the following year, though with adjusted staffing protocols and enhanced privacy measures. What changed, however, were subtle patterns visible primarily to those within service industries. Household staff requesting employment verification from the Al-Mansoori compound received unusually prompt and positive references supporting transitions to new positions. Compensation for remaining workers increased approximately 30% without formal policy announcements. Most notably, pregnant staff members reported unexpected accommodation including reduced duties, proper medical care, and maternity benefits exceeding statutory requirements, adjustments never acknowledged as policy changes but implemented consistently following Mae Ann's death. These operational adjustments, while meaningful to affected workers, represented pragmatic risk management rather than ethical recalibration. Family discussions, reported through staff networks that wealthy employers consistently underestimate, focused on preventing similar situations that might generate negative attention rather than addressing underlying power imbalances or cultural assumptions that enabled tragedy. The broader impact emerged through less visible channels. Worker advocacy organizations throughout Gulf states documented Mae Ann's case alongside similar situations, building evidentiary patterns demonstrating systematic vulnerabilities within existing labor protections. These compilations, shared with international human rights organizations and labor monitoring groups, gradually influenced policy discussions regarding domestic worker protections across multiple jurisdictions. Most significantly, Filipino deployment agencies revised preparation protocols for workers accepting positions in private households. Enhanced training now includes specific guidance regarding privacy rights, medical access, and communication maintenance with external contacts. Emergency response networks established following Mae Ann's case provide monitoring systems where regular check-ins are expected, with escalation procedures when contact patterns change unexpectedly. These systemic adjustments, while insufficient to prevent all similar situations, represent meaningful evolution in protective frameworks. Each administrative change, training enhancement, and monitoring protocol carries implicit acknowledgement that Mae Ann's isolation was neither unique nor inevitable, that structural vulnerabilities rather than individual circumstances created conditions where pregnancy became life-threatening within households of immense wealth and medical resources. The most profound legacy remains cultural rather than institutional. Within Filipino communities worldwide, Mae Ann's story has become contemporary folklore examining sacrifice, vulnerability, and resilience within global economic systems that extract labor while minimizing humanity. Her journey from nursing student to domestic worker to secret wife to isolated mother encompasses narratives about female agency, economic necessity, cultural boundaries, and ultimate human dignity that transcend individual circumstances. She represents thousands, observed Sister Maria Concepcion, who coordinates support services for returning overseas workers in Manila. Every worker who leaves home carrying family hopes. Every woman who discovers too late that promises mean different things to those with power than those without. Every mother who makes impossible choices between dignity and survival. This representational significance explains why Mae Ann's story continues circulating despite official resolution and family resources dedicated to minimizing public attention. Her experience illuminates intersections between global economics, cultural values, gender expectations, and legal frameworks that shape millions of lives moving between nations seeking opportunities that home economies cannot provide. For the Del Rosario family in Batangas, these broader implications remain secondary to personal loss. Teresa, whose health stabilized following treatment financed through settlement funds and community support, maintains a small shrine containing her daughter's nursing textbooks, the crucifix she wore throughout her time abroad, and a single photograph of Mae and in uniform during her first year in Dubai, smiling with hopeful determination that monetary calculations never fully valued. "My daughter believed some sacrifices are worthy," Teresa told community members during memorial services marking 1 year since Mae Ann's death. That temporarily leaving home to secure family future represented love rather than abandonment. That hardship accepted for others' benefit carries dignity regardless of how the world measures success. This dignified assessment stands in stark contrast to attitudes revealed through the Al-Mansoori family's crisis management perspectives, where inconvenient lives become administrative challenges rather than moral obligations, where sufficient resources transform accountability into negotiable financial settlements rather than behavioral recalibration. Between these perspectives lies the enduring question that Mae Ann's case forces upon comfortable assumptions. What human dignity is truly inalienable when systems consistently enable its violation without meaningful consequence? When power imbalances transform proper names into employment categories? When justice mechanisms remain theoretically available but practically inaccessible across economic divisions? Behind polished diplomatic relationships, international business partnerships, and carefully maintained public images, these questions continue disturbing comfortable narratives about globalization's benefits and costs. Mae Ann's final moments, alone on concrete floors beneath celebration she helped create but could never join, embody contradictions within economic systems that simultaneously enable and constrain, that offer opportunity inextricably linked with vulnerability, that promise dignity while structurally undermining its practical protection. Her daughter's brief existence, acknowledged through community ceremony rather than official recognition, represents countless lives shaped by decisions made in distant boardrooms and government offices, lives valued differently based on nationality, economic utility, and accident of birth rather than inherent human worth. The unmarked official grave contrasted against community memorial services reveals parallel value systems operating simultaneously within global economic relationships. What remains when strategic management concludes, when settlements process through financial systems, when media attention redirects toward newer tragedies, is the persistent question embodied in Mae Ann's final written words identifying her daughter by name. What systems of value recognize personhood beyond economic utility? What obligations transcend contractual minimums? What justice exists when power differentials determine which stories deserve investigation and which disappear behind administrative classification? The Halloween masks decorating celebration above while Mae Ann labored alone below offer fitting metaphor for these questions, symbolizing performative commitment to values that operational realities consistently contradict. The contrast between costume humanity and practical dehumanization, between theoretical rights and practical vulnerabilities, between what wealth proclaims and what it practices when accountability becomes inconvenient. Every perfect family photograph, every successful business announcement, and every diplomatic achievement celebrating the Al-Mansoori and Al-Farsi families now carries shadow narrative visible primarily to those whose labor maintains such appearances, knowledge that beneath polished surfaces and behind closed doors, different calculations apply to different categories of human experience. This shadow knowledge, passed through service networks that wealthy employers consistently underestimate, ensures that Mae Ann's story persists despite official conclusion and financial resolution. Her experience illuminates contradictions within systems that simultaneously celebrate and exploit, that offer opportunity inextricably linked with vulnerability, that promise dignity while structurally enabling its violation. For those willing to look beyond comfortable narratives about economic opportunity and cultural exchange, Mae Ann Del Rosario and her daughter Angelica may stand as witnesses requiring honest assessment of what truly constitutes justice when power determines which lives merit full accounting and which disappear behind administrative categories and financial settlements.